Education through the Orthodox Christian Network. This is a ministry of the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George in Bethesda, Maryland. I'm Michael Howdes, your facilitator, and we're going to get right into it. For those that may be joining for the first time, this year our theme has been, icons, Christ and life. Really been discussing an iconographic orientation to our reality, and it's been based on a wonderful book, or inspired, I should say, not based on it, but inspired by a wonderful book called From Object to Icon by Andrew Williams. He's an Orthodox Christian, Orthodox counselor. I recommend that book highly to everybody. It's written in a very easy to understand style, and really takes us deep, but in a way that's easily digestible about this, recapturing this whole iconographic nature of reality, kind of rescuing it back from a secular orientation or even worse. So for the past several months, we've been discussing our understanding in this framework of masks and veils and hypocrisy and marriage. And we've pretty much exhausted those topics. Today, though, we're going to go a little bit deeper, and I'm calling this discussion Icons, the Nous, and Seeing with Our Hearts. I assume as Orthodox Christians, those of you who are listening have heard of this terminology, the nous, maybe not. We'll get into it as best we can today. But let me just start with a question. For those in the room and those joining online, feel free to chime in the comment feature. But I just want to ask a basic question. How do you experience icons in your life? Can you remember a time where maybe they didn't have much influence or meaning to you versus what they do now?
Well, I mean, we venerate them, right?
Right.
We worship them.
Yeah.
I always looked upon them. I'll use the word tool, because that's probably the wrong word. Is maybe a kind of a way to attain a sort of look beyond the material and a kind of methodology towards achieving spiritualism and getting closer to God, looking at it in that way.
Right.
And more certainly they're more than a painting.
Yeah.
And they are viewed in our church as again sort of something more. We don't worship them.
Right.
We venerate them, but maybe as a kind of portal and a way to
portal's a good word.
Closer to attaining a type of spirituality.
Yeah, let me just say something real quick before I allow others to talk about their experience, because we use the word worship and venerate. Sometimes that confuses people outside of the Orthodox Church, and even the translation of Greek or Aramaic or Hebrew, sometimes venerate, sometimes worship. So regardless of what English, you always have to look at the word and how it's being used contextually. Even the word worship can be used contextually different than what we reserve for God alone. So when it comes to icons, we're talking about veneration as in reverence, revere. So no matter when that word is used, I just say that because if you pick up even Orthodox literature, it can really be confusing how we use those. But having said that, who else wants to talk about their understanding or experience with icons?
I have a question.
Sure.
If you see an icon in a museum, how do you feel about it?
Good question. Question for online, I couldn't hear it. If you see an icon in a museum, how do you feel about it is the question we just came up.
Particularly if, for instance, here, the National Gallery, and we have docents, and there's 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 people listening to the docent, and she or he describes it as something that it isn't. What happens? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe in a more, for lack of a term, sterile sort of place like a museum, it may be sort of harder to, a lot of people around, things like that, maybe experience a kind of spiritual kind of awakening. I don't want to say every time I look at an icon, I mean, stars go and things like that, but I think I have the same, I keep using the term veneration. I think I have the same sense of venerating it as something special, whether it's in a museum or, whether it's obviously there are icons that I think I feel closer to or like better than others. So I think I would sort of venerate it in the same way.
I hope I don't put you on.
No, well,
Good. You sound okay.
Yeah, sometimes I think a museum, to me at least, kind of my experience would be more of a passive response, more of like almost an observational response as opposed to a participatory or an engagement. Museums sometimes I think they're interesting, but I don't know. Sometimes museums of Orthodox art, if they're, I don't know if I've ever been to one. I've certainly seen Byzantine art. It's a different experience than engaging in a place of worship, or whether it's your prayer corner in your house.
like there's
Yeah.
a museum of
First of all,
Byzantine
museum, you can see not only from Orthodox Catholics icons as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, museum is primarily generally viewed. And I wouldn't say that it is that it should be, but generally viewed as a masterpiece of art.
Yeah, it's almost like it's. I mean, don't get me wrong. The museums serve a good function,
Yes.
but in this context, I think it's almost like a preservation of something that's not actively lived and engaged. That's, I think. Although
Right.
who knows?
Well, since they were blessed, maybe not necessarily exactly like that. Maybe frozen for certain.
Frozen's good. Yeah. Yeah.
But as most of them are really blessed, either by Orthodox or even by Catholics.
Well, yeah. Hey, Nick. I don't think there's a prescriptive answer here. This is more experiential. This is experiential. So I think it's interesting because it's building to something I want to get to today. That's why I'm asking the question.
But isn't the icon could be viewed on a website as kind of dual nature, as what Jesus human being, and
well, that's the whole. Yeah,
God,
that's part of the.
time, maybe icon is also piece of art is kind of earthy, sort of that.
Well, that's the purpose. The purpose is to remind us really of reality, but especially in our case, human beings' case, where we sometimes fall into maybe too much engagement with one aspect of reality, is to remind us of the spiritual truths, right? The spiritual reality that sometimes we can forget, and also be aids, in that case, be aids to our worship of God, because He gave us everything God gave us. He gave us everything He has. We're in His image and likeness. So we have, like, for instance, sight. It's different what we have than His sight, but it's still sight, right? So these things enable us to see. That's why I call this facilitation, seeing with our heart. So icons are things we can see, we can touch, we can engage with our minds, with our hearts. So there is. That's why I said sometimes the presentation of the icon and how we experience it counts for. Anyway, go ahead, John.
Just so many rich points that have already been raised here, and a rich question also, because a la the veneration of the icon, right? I mean, I think for all of us, it's a matter of the beginning of leaving our earthly cares behind and stepping into this portal and experiencing the divine, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what I think of, right? I'm looking into heaven, and it's pulling me away from this world into that world, right? So that's my portal, my window into the divine. But I like that question. I mean, there is an artistic quality to iconography.
Absolutely.
Right? Especially in the Orthodox Church. I can't take a crayon and do a rendering of Jesus Christ and present it to somebody because I call it an icon, because it's not.
No.
So there is an artistic quality to it. And I think there's a lot to be said for examining and appreciating the artistic quality that goes into iconography. This stylized painting for centuries.
Yeah, because it's all done according to, and I'm not an iconographer. Some of my friends could be here and could be a lot more informative, but there's certain things that you have to do because they're designed on purpose. We went through this, I think, maybe at the beginning of this year a little bit. I touched on it briefly, but they're designed on purpose to to take us to this other reality. So, they're not exact renditions, like exact portraits of a face, for example. There's certain characteristics. You said something too I thought was interesting about leave our earthly cares behind. Yes and no. Yes, absolutely, in the way we think of them, but it's a two-way street. We look into the icon comes back to us. It's also to transform our orientation to our earthly cares and experience and see them differently, which is very difficult, right? Because we're all facing, at any given time, we're facing terrible things, which breed earthly care in a burdening sense, right? So then, how do we experience those in a deeper sense? With like Paul says, grieve, especially in times of tragedy. Don't grieve without hope. Don't experience these things with some sort of finality of the event itself that does, like, as if there's nothing beyond it. In other words, here's another analogy to think of. It's experiencing our earthly cares as crucifixion only without remembering the resurrection. That's because they all, resurrection and crucifixion go hand in hand. There's no separation. We tend to dwell on, not we, maybe just me, but I think a lot of us tend to dwell on the crucifixion aspect of our lives, forgetting that whatever we're going through, it's all transformative to us.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the church doesn't approve every icon that's being done in the world. But in order for lack of a better term, an icon to be an icon, doesn't it have to be something that's been sort of preordained or pre-approved by the church, the topic or something? I can't, as saintly as he is, I can't go around and paint really a picture of Nick or something like that.
Yeah.
I believe either the topic or the icon representation has to be something that's been previously sanctioned by the church in a way that is providing a kind of methodology, a church-approved methodology to achieve the kind of spiritual.
Yeah, I think that's generally correct. I'm not an expert on that, so I really can't answer with a great definitiveness. But I do know that there are, usually icons are an iconographer has gone through an approval or a blessing, and there's certain things that I don't want to call them rules, but there's certain parameters. Usually, we don't depict anything that didn't happen in Scripture, or we don't just make it so, or yeah. So I think the answer to your question is yes.
I'm just trying to draw differences and why they are special as compared to something that's, again, just a kind of painting or statue or something like that.
I don't think that's altogether true. First of all, I spent some time with an iconographer, and I remember that she had a book, how to paint the different icons, and so there was a formula. And then also there are many churches, like in Greece, when I visited Spetses, where the particular church showed events that happened not during the Gospels during the Old Testament, but things of the German occupation, the Turkish Turkocratia, and martyrs that occurred later on of saints, and showing things in a very historic context. And the St. Nicholas Shrine in New York City, of course, displays events of the Twin Towers and stuff too.
But are they considered icons?
Yes.
Yeah.
But anyway,
But there must be a special dispensation or
I think-
something.
Well, yeah, and I remember doing a little bit of research. I did a little bit of research on it. I didn't go too far with it because it wasn't. I'm not saying this isn't a good discussion. I'm saying it's beyond my ability. I didn't spend a lot of time with it because it wasn't germane to where I was going this year. But I understand that true to orthodoxy, true to life, there's like guidelines, and then there's things that fall outside that then they get sanctioned. Somebody can certainly create iconic icons, and they can be blessed later, not pre-commissioned or pre-blessed. So it's we're not going to find. It's my understanding, but
Orthodoxy, Michael, there aren't any rules.
That's it.
exactly, which is
And are we glad for that? Otherwise, we wouldn't be here
Yeah.
on this table.
we don't have
which
to
is great. But here's the
Yeah.
thing. So there's something that even now we're going to get to the meat of this. The fact that we're even having this discussion gets to really the purpose of today's discussion. So,
in spite of whatever rules involved, and certain standards. Actually, sometimes church approves even photography of icons if good quality is made and copies.
Paper,
But-
there
Mhm.
are paper.
Oh, yeah.
icons.
That's why I
But
was,
anyway, while certain standards and whatever requirements must be met, we still can't compare icons made by even good but ordinary artists. Yeah, and let's say Andrei Rublev, probably
Oh, yeah.
one of the
Sure.
most, if not most famous. That's what actually Russia and the church, despite what is going on right now politically, it's one of the, if not number one, national proud, iconic.
Andrei Rublev did the icon we're all familiar with. It was based on, it's a Trinitarian icon, the three
Yeah.
visitors. It's based on the scene in Genesis where Abraham, that's what we're talking about. For those that didn't know, not the tennis player Andrei Rublev, who just won in 5 sets today, but the separate,
By the
separate
way,
issue.
movie about Andrei Rublev, which can be found, highly recommend. If you
Yeah.
want to know
I
more
saw
about
it.
iconic.
I went
It's
3 times.
probably number one artist masterpiece in the mode of, especially in Orthodox painting, and he actually quite a bit struggled for raised of his standard. He was not accepted by the church right away.
No, it's not.
You should look 'em up.
Yeah, Andrei Rublev.
Okay.
So,
Right.
so
That's actually one of the experience. Yes, that can be and is impressive and feel something when looking at the icons.
well, there's something that enables us to even do that. Because like if I pulled someone off the street and showed them an icon, they may say that's nice, and they're not going to see it the same way. But those of us in this room and those listening online probably do have a different experience with the icon. Much of what we're talking about, there's a reason for that. It gets to stuff. So I guess the question is, what is the nous? So has anybody not heard of that term before? It's fine if you haven't. It doesn't mean you're deficient. You're saying you haven't heard
But
of
yes,
it?
I know I have. heard
Okay.
it before, so-
Yeah,
Officially defined as the eye of the soul.
that's one way to put it. We're gonna hopefully we'll have a good discussion about it because it's really not hard, easy to define. Actually, I'll get it later. I have a book here, but may not be germane today. Yeah, that's one way to put it. I'm going to read you the book I quoted, or the book I mentioned. I'm going to read you what Andrew Williams says. He says, the nous, then in quotes, the eye of the heart, we might describe as the organ of iconographic seeing and iconological understanding. The nous is the center of our soul or heart, the point at which we can connect most directly to God, which is also to say, connect with ultimate reality. Your daughter? Yeah.
You want to repeat that.
Yeah, okay. Let me start over. Let me try again. The nous, the eye of the heart, we might describe as an organ of iconographic seeing and iconological understanding. The nous is the center of our soul or heart, the point at which we can connect most directly to God, which is also to say, connect with ultimate reality. That's what he says. Now I got a bunch of other stuff here, so I'll just take a deep breath and let you react to that, because that's saying a lot. Anybody feel now, oh, I know what the nous is? Lesson over.
I think I went to a concert on Thursday at Strathmore, and the last piece in the presentation was Death and Transfiguration.
Hmm.
And it left me just trembling. I have that experience sometimes when I take communion.
Yeah.
Shaken.
It's a wonderful thing to have those moments where we feel like, even if it's very brief, that something is transformational. We're experiencing transcendence, which is really important today, because I want to make an argument here, and not an argument, like, a case that much of what we suffer from today has to do with the nous of people that still allow it to remain darkened, if you will, and live in a disenchanted reality. Now, enchantment and disenchantment are terms that I use, and certainly, I'm just going to say right now, for those of you that may read or listen to podcasts or read blogs of the who's who of American Orthodoxy. And I mean it in a good way. Like, there's certain names, if I threw them out, I'm not going to use names today, but if I threw them out, you'd be like, oh yeah, I know that person. So, and I'm fortunate enough to play in that world because of what I do. So I know a lot of these people personally, and I know that a lot of us use these terms enchantment and disenchantment, where some are totally against it because they think it connotes magic and all this stuff. But, and if I offend some people, I'm not trying to, but I think to a large extent that we live in a disenchanted reality, which makes it difficult sometimes to perceive and experience through our nous, the wonderful things that God, the wonderful ways God is speaking to us, especially through icons. This always happens to me, and I love this. So I'm preparing this lesson, and I read a lot of blogs and books and stuff. So I'm always feeding the quote database I have for my quotes of the day. So I'm always reading to. I enjoy what I read, but I always just extract quotes from it. So I'm reading this blog, and it's lining up exactly with what I'm reading it yesterday, and it's lining up exactly where I want to go today. And this is a blog by Father Stephen Freeman called "The Song of All Creation," and in it he quotes this German sociologist who said around 1918, "The world has become disenchanted," and what he meant by that was. A secular immanent reality that's lost the sense of the transcendent and the sacred. And it's led to a materialistic understanding of reality that's almost become indifferent to forms and instances of suffering. And it's resulted in an unhealthy appetite for entertainment where, to kind of fill boredom of the world, where Christianity, our worldview is that the world is not empty; it's filled with a depth of meaning. Right, what we see, the visible and the invisible, and in order to see both with clarity, it has to do with this thing we call the nous, right? Our organ of perception and all the things that God has given us in the church proper, outside of the church, the broader church of the world, to be drawn to Him and to experience Him. In that, modern culture has become disenchanted, almost has an amnesia to all this stuff. And I don't know if you remember, it was several years ago, but I was trying to build a case that for those that write like this and are building a case that the world is largely, people feel like it's disenchanted, but yet they're haunted by what they're missing. Even the most militant secular atheists are haunted by what they're missing. And the evidence potentially could be, if you look at the top 10, 50 grossing movies of all time, and it changes, but it's always, the majority of them are usually fantasy movies or sci-fi movies or Marvel comic movies. All these movies that are, embodying some other kind of transcendent reality different than ours, right? These are the stories that people want, that they flock to. Not everybody's taste, right? But if you look a lot of the entertainment, a lot of it is these kind of things that are larger than life, because something's missing that people want to have that sort of thing. Mary, I thought you were raising your hand. So does that ring of truth to you, or it doesn't sound like? I don't know if I buy that, Michael.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of the first Star Wars movie. Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was sort of like a mystical figure. It wasn't somebody that had a lot of physical prowess, but there was something deeper about him that was really compelling, that I thought. And of course, Gandalf. That's we can go into that.
Yeah, different worldviews on those two characters, but for sure. But it's that kind of thing, right? It's not. I don't think. not everybody flocks to those type of things because not everybody likes it. Number one, some people don't feel the need. They have everything. They have everything they need to draw closer to God and aren't haunted by something missing. But John,
some may argue, and I don't know these scientific studies quote unquote well enough, that we're biologically programmed to worship. And this is something that humanity has been experiencing for tens or hundreds of thousands of years, in whatever form, and where we have cut ourselves off over the last, say, 100 plus years, right? With materialism or scientism,
Mhm.
or, this is all there is. There's nothing else. To your point about disenchantment, that void is filled with something else.
Yes.
So we don't call it religion, but it's something. And if people don't have religion, they worship something else.
Yeah, I would think that at some degree that's fairly self-evident in the sense of, you study human history and cultures, there's always worship of, worship, right? And it's usually been, a deity, right? Something divine. It's been, Mary and I were talking this morning. I mean, most of the, not most of it, the entire Bible was formed in response to wrong worship, pagan worship, not what we think of today as pagan. People dabble in these things, right? True pagan worship, where we were talking before class began, that resulted in things, human sacrifice, disregard, of human beings. Whereas, from the time of Christ on, there's now human rights, right? I heard a priest talking about the other day. I think it was Father Stephen DeYoung, but all these wonderful things. And now we've kind of entered into a phase where it seems like, at least in this culture here in the United States, I guess no, more Western European maybe, we've kind of fallen into this this immanent frame, as Charles Taylor, the sociologist, talks about, where there's nothing transcendent. And so it affects, and then we argue, religion actually evolved into something that it's become something now that you can put into a compartment. Whereas before it was never discussed that way, because there wasn't this separation of sacred and secular. It's just one reality. And so when the Bible in the Psalm says the fool says to himself, there is no God, that doesn't mean that person saying God doesn't exist. That means the fool is not deciding not to follow God, but to follow the other gods, right? But there was never a question. You read the Bible from front to back, you're never going to find anything in there that says questioning God's existence. It's just, right, unlike today, there's a whole, God doesn't exist. Religion's nice for some people. It's a nice thing for your life. I'm glad it enriches you. Very good. I don't believe in organized religion. Really? Let me point out your life. You actually live in some organized religion fashion. You just don't call it that. That kind of thing. So, but it's this nous, this thing we talk about in Orthodoxy, that enables us to have the experiences that we believe we have, to have, to have an understanding. I mean, it's even the very fact that we accept this to be true is because of how God designed us, and and how He wired us, right? And of course, we can choose whatever we want. I mean, to some extent, but
if you can choose, I'm not sure that you can choose. I don't choose to feel like I do about this. It's a thing. It's present.
You could choose to avoid going to the Strathmore or going to church, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only that's
okay,
the choice that you
sure.
have. Yeah.
And you can choose not to drink water.
I'm going to watch TV.
Or
sports.
yes.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I said it tongue in cheek last week, maybe the week before. I don't remember. I always quote Father Thomas Hopko, who says we have free will, we have no choice, right? To articulate what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think right now any one of us could choose to no longer be practicing Orthodox Christians. Could we really leave behind what we believe, despite ourselves? Probably not. Or you see people like I way back. Gosh, I've been doing this 9 years podcasting. I remember one of my early podcasts. I talked about the story of Billy Graham and Charles Templeton. I know you've heard of Billy Graham, right?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, but you probably haven't heard of Charles Templeton. My guess would be Charles Templeton was Billy Graham's mentor, right? And was at one point people would know Charles Templeton, would not know Billy Graham. Charles Templeton, at some point, something got into him where he ceased to believe, and he wanted to believe again, but he couldn't. He couldn't get there. And one of the last conversations Billy Graham and him had, Charles Templeton had Alzheimer's, and he's like, just please, and he said, I don't believe anymore, but please pray for me. Right. So I think that gets along the lines, maybe, Maritza, what you're talking about.
Perhaps,
Yeah.
So if Chrysostomos Gunning were here in this room right now, he would remind us all that every Christian makes this decision of this journey from here to here,
Mhm.
to the heart. And it's, as he says, it was the longest 9 inches in the world, is from the intellect to the soul, the heart, that unknowable thing.
That's why a lot of prayer posturing. You're looking down at your navel. You're bending because, when you read about, if you read the Philokalia, or you do any type of study about the Jesus prayer and how they prayed, they're physical. There was never divorce from the physical body. A lot of times they would look, bend themselves, because it's to your point. It was understanding the descent from here to here of knowing, this noetic understanding of the nous, noetic, because we're, and it doesn't sit well in with a lot of people that where we've elevated human reason almost to a deified state. But most knowing is from this thing called the nous, right? This deep knowing that transcends fact and logic, where you just know. And of course, today that's a cop out. What do you know? Prove it. Right?
Well, if you have a child in your life,
Yeah.
and if you've seen 16, 18-month-old baby home,
Mhm.
knows all about mom and dad, and one of his beloved parents comes in the room, and they're pre-verbal,
Mhm.
and they stamp their feet and go, can't talk, but you know that child is saying, I recognize you. I love you.
Well, I mean, you mentioned logic. My understanding, again, I don't understand it very well, but the emphasis on the concept of nous in the Orthodox Church, especially emphasized by St. Gregory of Palamas,
Mhm.
who I really don't understand it. But in terms of kind of a reaction to what was going on in sort of Western theology, the kind of Thomas Aquinas sort of, there's nothing bad about this,
Mhm.
but sort of, logical proofs of God's existence, and the Orthodox Church saying, well, that's fine and good, but that's something of this world, and we need to go beyond that, go through the eye of the nous, go through spirituality, go through, was it the chronema or whatever, that we had the lecturer talk about a few months
The mind of
ago.
Christ. Yeah.
To go to sort of transcend all of that. Anyway.
Yeah, transcend and incorporate it, right? God, love God with all your heart, your mind, your soul. So we it's not that we've, sometimes mistakenly we can actually denigrate logic and human reason as if it's a bad thing. No, it's a good thing, but it's all holistic, right? Our understanding. Yeah, it gives us a means to understand. But to your point, Reed, so most of our knowledge, most of what we learn starts here. We take it in here before it can sink in here. That's why I was asking about what's your experience of icons, because at one point, I would say in my life, I thought they were cool, but now, like, I can't imagine not having them. I couldn't imagine coming into a church anymore that had no icons in it, or going home to my prayer corners in my house, no icons. It would feel empty. And that's not because I know something. It's because I know something. That's what, but it started here.
Mhm.
Oh, study something, and I actually had conversation with Chrysostomos about that. It's not quite as cut and dry here to here.
No, it is.
It's a lot of times it's both at once, and it's ultimately letting this take lead, right?
Language is
Yeah.
difficult to use to explain
Yeah.
or describe the indescribable.
Well, that's why the nous is a tough concept, because depending on who you read, you'll hear words heart, mind, eye of the heart, eye of the soul. I have a book in my book bag. I won't bring it out right now, but it's actually the book about mental disorders through how the Holy Fathers understood them. And it's fascinating because when you read it, and it's deep, and I don't mean to imply that no one in this room is deep, but people take in information differently. So sometimes something that's quote unquote deep can be so dry that a highly intelligent person that would understand it in a different phrase in a different way might not resonate with this, because I just slog myself. Personally, I kind of had to slog through it. But what was really fascinating was that the way they described the nous, they described it in 3,000 different ways. But the whole context of their understanding, they didn't have the science of our day, but they had the holistic understanding of a person, body, mind, and soul far greater than we seem to. Like when I go to certain doctors, you know, and our doctors tend to be, you know, fairly progressive in this mind body thing. It's almost like we're rediscovering this, that we lost, you know, like I was talking to this doctor the other day about breathing, and he's telling me about breathing, and he happens to be a Roman Catholic, so you know, he made the connections, but he's saying all this stuff to me. I'm like, you know, this reminds me of what we talk about in the Jesus Breakers, exactly, but I can't say that to everybody, you know, because I have to quote the science and the scientific studies and all that to show the relationship of our breathing, the pneuma, the breath, right, the breath of life, to how it helps us not only in our autonomic system, our nervous system, just our general well-being, and all these things connect. In the context of the Nous and understanding human beings, they understood all this. It's fascinating. So, go ahead.
You know, I was watching some sports with my kids, and what you said was that innate need to pray and be faithful. And I think about that football player who dropped over.
Damar Hamlin.
Stand.
Oh yeah.
Because everybody was helpless. What did everybody do?
Right on their knee. Yeah.
Right? The
Yeah.
whole stadium started praying. And then we looked probably about a year and a half later, and we were watching this documentary the other night with my kids. And they were saying, yes, thank you for all the well wishes. Thank you for, you know, all of these things. And they ended it, and I'm like, what about all the prayers?
I know.
And it's like this journey that we're going on, and we're fighting the social inertia at the same time. So we're all going on this. It's not politically correct.
Let's
I don't
say
know
it's
how-
out of the word prayer is like,
Yes.
yeah.
And it's like everybody was getting down on their knees and praying because no one knew that innate need, that's all you could do. And I just found it fascinating. And my kids just looked at me and they picked up on it as well, because it just initiated a whole nation of prayers. And that was the one thing that was eliminated from talking about it. And it was very fascinating to me. And then going on to what you said about how they were talking about mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before there was science, before there were medications, there was communication. And all we had was love and communication, and that counseling through communication, right? Before the science and the medications, because now what do we want? We want a magic pill to fix everything. Right? We want a pill. But we forget that those archaic methods of just talking and communication and getting down, you can stuff your feelings all you want. But unless you expose them to deal with who you are as a person, a medication is just going to numb you.
Now, not only do we want it that way, I would say that we want the magic fix for everything. But all those books, 7 steps to this, 8 steps to this, 9 steps. Like, you do all this, everything will be good. If you don't do it, it's your fault because you're dumb. You didn't get it right. I mean, it's like, it's not. The life doesn't work that way. We want the quick fix, the quick. You know, that's what I love about orthodoxy, because orthodoxy can be maddening to you until you accept the fact. It's just, reality is not that way. Reality is not. You can't. You know, again, we tend as human beings to like to reduce things, or then we go to the extremes, and we always have the direction going this way. You know, that's what I said. I've said it many times here. One of my biggest epiphanies in my faith journey was stop trying to get Christ into my life, getting into the life of Christ, and then everything opened up for me. And still does, because once you maintain that orientation, you know, once your nous at least gets oriented in the right direction. Not that it doesn't need continual cleaning, right? But you know what I'm saying? It's when you accept the fact that things are bigger than your ability to fully understand them, and that's okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just reminded of something. I talked to you about it, but I watch YouTube videos, and one of them, the style of video that I was watching was, why did I pick Roman Catholicism instead of Orthodox? And inevitably, this person will say, I like Roman Catholicism better because if I have a question, there's somebody that will give me a definitive answer. And it's either the Pope or the Curie Magisterium or whatever. And Michael, you had a great answer for that. I don't know if you remember this.
I do not.
And well, anyway, Michael just said, yeah, well, we don't know all the answers, and that's part of being a Christian. And some things there are no definitive. What
I don't remember what I
But
said.
yeah.
you said something like that anyway.
Yeah.
But in reality, Catholics themselves, at least nowadays, I'm not sure if they giving definite or not definite answer, but they at least became more tolerant to other. I would give them credit.
Yeah, you
Uh,
can't. I don't think you were trying.
They say they even more tolerant than never been before to Orthodox and to many Protestants, and they saying often that they might have partially truth.
My experience, all the wonderful Roman Catholics I've known, I personally have never experienced what I call intolerance. It's just an orientation to how you experience a faith, and it comes out of more of the Latin culture, jurisdictional culture, where things were more put in, categorized or whatever. And people in Orthodoxy do that all the time. They want everything neat in a box, and they'll be the first to tell you if you say or do something that's not Orthodox based on how they understand it. And it's like that's not always the case. But our general orientation is one of, hey, we don't know everything. Go ahead, Mary.
Getting back to Andrea's point about forgetting the prayers. Last week there was a football player who went on. I don't know if you saw the game, and thank God, and said without his blessings and blah blah blah. Well, when they put it out on social media, the press cut apart about it. So I wonder how much is in today's society, how much people are forgetting it, or it's what is being fed to us.
Well, you have people, it seems to be, and I haven't studied this as a sociologist, so it seems to me that a lot of people that are more in the minority in terms of pure numbers, but control a lot of the dialogue, control. So we get that kind of filter version. I personally don't think, and what I'm about to say, I base it just on my day-to-day experience with people, is I don't think there's like anti-prayer, anti-sentiment broadly as much as there are in certain pockets that are controlling, everything. Because most of the people I encounter on a daily basis, I've had many, even at work situations, I've had many dialogues about prayer and faith and whatever. So I don't, it feels hopeful to me, but maybe I'm wrong. But I know when I watch TV and I watch certain things, there's clear agendas, there's clear messaging, there's clear deliberate attempts to undermine a certain what we believe is reality. So who knows? But I know we all have a hard stop in about 8 minutes. So let me get into a little bit. This will set it up for next week. Let's get into a little bit of how some very recognized people describe the Nous. Right? I'll requote some what modern Orthodox authors have to say. This is from Dr. Jeannie Constantino, who came to our church. Yeah. And so when I was just on a Zoom call with most of these people the other day, it's kind of funny to hear us all interacting because we usually work all in silos. She says the Nous is the aspect of the human mind that has the capacity to contemplate God. Sound reasonable? Would it be how you describe it? I wouldn't describe it that way. Not that I wouldn't argue with her. I'm not saying that. It's just I tend to always use the language of the heart, right?
I think it's beyond contemplation.
Yeah.
Though, isn't it? Really, it's kind of not maybe becoming like God, but understanding and that type of thing, or
Well,
becoming more sort of Christian in your orientation.
I think,
that to me just implies kind of just a proof saying, well, God just exists.
I don't think that's what she means. And the reason I base that, John, just on some interactions with her and then reading her work.
Yeah, that's probably not what you mean.
No.
It comes out that way to me.
Yeah, no, that's good because, this is good because words mean something to people. So if you hear that, you're thinking, yeah. I think when she uses the word contemplate, I think she means something very deep there. Not just, because contemplation in the Orthodox, in the phronema is not just sitting around thinking. You contemplate through that, but you also contemplate through engagement and participation, right? And it's the aspect of your mind that allows you to do that, right? It's the very thing that allows you, or motivates you, or the reason you even come to church in the first place, the reason you come to this discussion, because you're contemplating. I think that's what she means. Now, in fairness, she's not here, so if she, yeah, she may listen to this and say, no, Michael, you're all wet, but that's not what I meant. But that's what I think. John, you're going to say something? Okay. Here's another one. Father Stephen Freeman, who I look at as my kindred spirit. The nous is the eye of the soul, the faculty by which we know God, and thus the faculty by which we know ourselves. So we got eye of the soul, eye of the heart, eye of the mind. This is what's maddening about orthodoxy to many people. Just pick one, right? Which one is it?
Does everybody have a nous?
Yes. Every human being. We're all born in God, with God's image and likeness. And this is what he gave us. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
so then if a Jewish person is contemplating God, are we able to speak of the same? Are we able to, is he feeling what I'm feeling?
Maybe.
I think so.
Maybe. I mean, meaning like, their understanding in vocabulary
Hindu,
different.
Buddhist. I think so.
Well, every human being is created in the image of God with the capacity to grow into his likeness. That's what we believe. And we also believe that, we have this great gift we've been given, Christ himself through his church. But that doesn't mean that people outside don't have the experience of God. And we, Callistus Ware, Metropolitan Callistus Ware, blessed memory, used to say, we know where the Holy Spirit is. We don't know where he isn't. So be very careful in our judgments and characterization of people outside. Now, some would say, hey, you're promoting universalism. No, I'm not. What I'm saying is, I don't know. I don't know how a Jewish person, unless I talk to a Jewish person, has, what their experience of God.
Remains.
The capacity remains. Everybody does. And everybody receives and is blessed by God based on the capacity and circumstance in which they're in, right? That's why we're not judged in comparison to each other. We're judged by what we've been given and how well we use it. And frankly, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but and we'll get into this more next week. We're also judged by how well we opt into the program that God has given us. What I mean by that is that often, we tend to a lot of times judge ourselves by the evils we don't do, and we miss out on the good we're not doing, the good we could be doing, right? Because God is. We talked about it before class began, how what we talked about is God is ruling amidst his enemies. I think that's how the Podfathers put it one time, and he's doing something. The world is being, from our perspective, slowly transformed. But if you look
in a better direction,
you look globally before and after Christ, right? And you'll see, this whole notion of human rights never existed in antiquity at one point. So you just see all these wonderful things, and as God's imagers, given this nous, given this capacity, as his imagers on this planet, our job is to opt in and participate in his good works to the capacity that we've been given in our situations. And if we don't, we're the goats. Sheep and the goats. So it's not just sin is not just avoidance of doing bad things. It's falling short of doing good things, right? I mean, it gets really tough. I mean, I know I've been in my own mind. When I really get hit. I mean, even this little thing. I remember reading John the Baptist. We have 2 coats, give that guy 1. And in my closet are 5 coats while someone's freezing. You know what I'm saying? That's the truth. I don't want to face it, but that's really the truth. I have more than I need. And I get shamed by it when I think about it. And I think about, my gosh, what kind of life do we lead? Most of us have more than we need. Thank God for God's grace and mercy as we try to do good works, right? And I think we all do. We're all in this room. I would imagine we all do. But I'm saying is we probably don't do all the good works we could, any of us. But God in his mercy blesses what we do. And if our nous, our hearts are right, he blesses, I'll end with this, just I know we have a hard stop. But when you really look at the saints, and it's not a balance sheet. The saints didn't become saints because they achieved on balance better works than, no. Most of them didn't. Most of them, look at the thief on the cross who had salvation. At one point, he was jeering Christ himself, because you see that in the Gospel of Matthew. When you read Luke, you realize in that 3-hour period, he changed. And the Lord accepted that change. So, it gets a little tricky, but I'll end with this saying, whatever this thing is, we'll get into it more next week. Eye of the soul, eye of the heart, eye of the mind, this capacity we have in us to understand and orient ourselves to God is what needs to be the thing that we're always doing in all aspects of our life. And understand too, don't fall into God's judging us to try to nail us. He's still a merciful, loving God. And sometimes it's tough love. We have to look in the mirror and feel that shame so we can be better. So I will end with that. We'll get into this more next week. I got a lot more definitions of the nous to further confuse us. And then I want to talk about next week some of the things that Christ said himself about blessed are the pure in heart, and understand this whole concept of purity, what it really means, and how it plays into this overall understanding. So thank you everybody for joining online. It's 12:30 our time, and many of us have hard stops. So I appreciate you joining online as always. If you have any comments, I'll answer them during the week. God bless everyone. And as far as I know, we're going to have this class next week, Sunday, January 28th. Take care, everybody.
When is it?
28th.